Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going to break down how organizations build their digital defenses using something called security controls. This is a really core concept for anyone who's even a little bit interested in cybersecurity.
So here's the game plan. We'll start with the basics. What even is a security control? Then we'll get into how they're layered, how you set a standard across a company, how you fine-tune them, and finally, the big one, how you figure out what they're actually worth.
All right, let's start at square one and really build this thing from the ground up. What exactly are we talking about when we say security control?
Let's just forget about computers for a second. Picture a real-world fortress. If you wanted to protect it, you wouldn't just build one big wall and hope for the best, right? No way. You'd have a moat, you'd have guards on patrol, tall towers, super strong gates. You'd use a whole combination of strategies. Well, the digital world is exactly the same idea.
So, to put it simply, security controls are all the different tactics and tools we use to protect our stuff online. They are our digital modes, guards, and gates. And look, this isn't just about super high-tech firewalls. A control can be anything from a sophisticated antivirus software to something as simple as making sure all employees get training on how to spot a phishing email.
And controls really exist to deal with these two big ideas. On one side, you've got a vulnerability. That's just a known weakness, like that Windows update you keep hitting Remind Me Tomorrow on. On the other side, you've got an exploit, and that's when a hacker actually uses that weakness to get in. The whole goal of a good security control is to patch the vulnerability before it ever gets a chance to become an exploit.
Okay, so just having a random collection of controls isn't quite enough. The real magic is in how you arrange them. And this brings us to a really cool idea: the onion versus the domino.
First, let's talk about the nightmare scenario, the thing we want to avoid at all costs, the domino effect. This is when your security is so fragile that one little mistake, one stolen password, one infected laptop, knocks everything else over and basically gives an attacker the keys to the kingdom.
Now, the ideal strategy? It's the total opposite, the onion effect. Think about it. To get to the really valuable stuff at the center of an onion, you have to peel back layer after layer after layer. That's what we want for our security. An attacker has to fight through multiple, independent defenses. Each layer just makes their job harder, and more importantly, gives you a better chance of catching them in the act.
This really powerful strategy has an official name. It's called defense in depth, and it's one of the most fundamental ideas in all of cybersecurity today. The philosophy is simple, but it's so important. You have to assume that any one of your controls might fail, so you always have another one right behind it, ready to pick up the slack. So this whole layered defense in depth thing sounds great, right? But how in the world do you actually apply it consistently across a huge organization that has, hundreds or even thousands of computers? You can't just wing it. You need a standard. And that's where something called a security baseline comes in. A security baseline is basically your non-negotiable rulebook. It's the absolute minimum standard of security that every single computer, every server, every device in the whole organization has to meet, no exceptions. This makes sure you don't have any obvious weak spots, and it creates a really consistent, predictable defense. And here are some classic real-world examples of what you'd find in that rulebook. Every single machine must have antivirus. No one is allowed to run an old, outdated operating system. Regular users can't have admin rights that let them install whatever they want. See? These aren't just suggestions. They're mandatory rules that are enforced automatically to get rid of all those common, easy-to-exploit problems across the entire network. But a baseline is just that, a base. It's a starting point, not a one-size-fits-all solution. Think about it. A hospital that deals with incredibly sensitive patient data has totally different security needs than, say, a video game development company. That means the baseline almost always needs to be fine-tuned. This fine-tuning process usually has four main parts. First, you do what's called scoping. You just go through and pick out the controls that are actually relevant to you. Then, you tailor them. So a baseline might say, encrypt all data, but you might tailor that to only encrypt the super sensitive stuff to make things run faster. If a rule doesn't quite work for you, you can use a compensating control, basically a different tool that gets the same job done. And finally, you supplement by adding brand new controls to handle risks that are totally unique to your business.
All right, let's talk about the elephant in the room: money. None of this is free. All these controls, all these layers and standards, they cost money to buy, to set up, and to maintain. And this leads us to a really critical business question. How do you balance being protected with being practical?
Because at the end of the day,
Every single security decision is also a business decision. You always have to weigh the price of putting in a protection against the risk of what happens if you don't.
Well, let's break that down. On one side of the scale, you have the actual cost of the control. You know, the price of the software, the hardware, training your people, all of that. But on the other side of the scale, you have to weigh the potential and often catastrophic cost of getting attacked. We're talking data breaches, huge ransomware payments, and maybe worst of all, completely losing your customers' trust.
So the calculation you have to make is actually pretty simple. The investment makes sense when the control costs less than the disaster it's designed to prevent. I mean, if you spend $10,000 on a tool that stops a $1 million data breach, well, that's a fantastic return on investment, or what we call ROI.
And that pretty much wraps up our tour of security controls. So the question I want to leave you with is this. Is your security an onion, or is it a line of dominoes? Are your defenses layered, resilient, and actually ready for an attack, or is there one single weak spot just waiting to get pushed over?